That out for us. Let's bring in now California Congresswoman Linda Sánchez. She is a Democrat on the Benghazi committee. Congresswoman, thanks so much for taking time for us this morning. We know you have a busy day. As Brianna just laid out, at least 8 hours of testimony is expected from Hillary Clinton. There are 12 of you members, 5 Democrats. I believe you all get to split your time evenly in terms of asking her questions. How do you plan to use your time?
Well, I plan to use my time in a way that allows the Secretary to respond to many of the smear tactics and half-truths and outright lies that have been perpetuated by the Republican majority in charge of this committee, giving her an opportunity to once and for all set the record straight and push back on many of the fantastical conspiracy theories that they've been peddling over the 17 months of this investigation.
And yet, Congresswoman, there are still questions that remain. Our own Elise Labott of CNN has a great piece on CNN.com about the 5 sort of overarching questions that Americans still have. I'll just read you one of them. Why did the U.S. remain in Benghazi despite the escalation of violence and even as other consulates were being closed? Has that been sufficiently answered? What's the answer?
It's been answered over and over and over again. There are 8 separate reports that investigated the events of September 11th, 2012 in Benghazi.
But what is the answer, Congresswoman, as to why the U.S. was still in Benghazi when the security situation was escalating?
Because Ambassador Stevens believed very strongly that there was great intelligence to be had from that region of Libya, that even though Tripoli was the de facto capital, that there were people in Benghazi that were providing intelligence, and that the power structure really of the new government was in Benghazi, and we needed to have a presence there in order to understand what was happening in that country. As I said, the 8 different reports all laid this out, and either the Republicans on that committee aren't reading those reports, or they're asking the same questions over and over again that have already been answered multiple times. There's nothing new in 17 months, there's nothing new that they've uncovered that changes the narrative of what happened that evening.
Well, Congresswoman, you say that there's nothing new. However, people like John Boehner and the Republicans say that they're getting new information all the time. For instance, John Boehner, just let me tell you this in specifically. John Boehner this week said that it wasn't until Monday, this past Monday, that they got 1,300 pages of Ambassador Chris Stevens' emails. So
that's simply not true.
They say they were just delivered on. So he's wrong.
Well, they've been in existence, and they've been seen prior to Monday. I mean, sure, there may be a few because they've requested hundreds of thousands of documents, but those emails are nothing new. They knew that Chris Stevens had sent those emails. They knew that he had requested additional security. Again, they're peddling this narrative that there's all this new information. Any information that they've gotten still fits into what the 8 prior reports have reported, and the conclusion in those reports, which is that the events that evening were unexpected, that the folks that responded not only responded adequately but heroically, that tragically 4 Americans lost their lives, but that none of these fantastical conspiracy theories are borne out by any of the evidence. The fact of the matter is that people responded appropriately. They did all that they could that evening. And yes, it's a tragedy that 4 Americans lost their lives, but I think it's also a tragedy that we're spending millions of taxpayer dollars to chase these conspiracy theories that once we put them to bed because there's no evidence, they keep repeating the same things over and over again in the hopes that somehow that convinces the American people that something different happened that evening when it didn't.
Let's talk about the American people, because there are some new CNN polls about Benghazi out just this morning, and it has a finger on the pulse of how the Americans are feeling about this. Let me just show you a couple. Have the Republicans gone too far with the Benghazi hearings was the question. And 40% say yes, but handled appropriately is more, 51%. And that's up, by the way, since May and June. So while Americans do believe that there is certainly a political thread to all of this, it sounds as though they do think that the Republicans are trying to really investigate and get to the bottom of this.
Well, it's admitted by top Republican leadership that the purpose for this committee was to go after Hillary Clinton and drive down her poll numbers. So the credibility of the committee is in question. And $5 million of taxpayer monies have been spent over the course of 17 months to try to discredit Hillary Clinton, to try to smear her with half-truths, with information that's taken out of context that they've been leaking to the press over 17 months. It just goes to show you by those poll numbers that the American people have been influenced by the amount of time, money, attention that they've spent attacking her credibility. As Kevin McCarthy himself stated, they've been able to drive her poll numbers down. That's not accidental. That was their intention all along. So you could argue that, yes, they've been very successful at convincing the American people that something nefarious has happened, but they've not been true to their mission of the Select Committee, which is to provide answers and closure for the families. They promised that to the families, and they haven't done that.
And we'll see if that happens today. Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, thanks so much for taking time for New Day this morning. We'll be watching with great interest.